Over again this week, and part of the things that stuck out in my memory are old sayings, or at least I thought they were always old sayings when I was growing up. When I wanted a little money to go to the corner store and buy candy or whatever, my mother would say, "Money is the root of all evil." Any of you remember that? When I want, a lot of us want, you know? Some of us want good things, some of us just want. You know, I hear my grandsons, they have their own cell phones, but what they'd really like are the new iPhones that cost, what, $500–600? I'm sure TJ would love to have one of those, wouldn't you, TJ? Mm-hmm. We want. Not that we need, but we want. And I think about that. Money is the root of all evil. Talks about, Timothy is one of those books that gave us a lot of those old sayings, you know? Sayings like, what's the strongest muscle in our body? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? It's our tongue, and it gets us in trouble more than anything else. That was Timothy. You know? Do unto others. You can't get to heaven if you're divorced. You can't preach in a church if you're divorced. That all came from Timothy, believe it or not. Can't be a leader, it's Timothy. Because he said preachers needed to be of one spouse. So did prophets and teachers. Talked a lot about that stuff. About all the don'ts in life. And a lot of us have been taught about all the don'ts in life. I think about Lazarus. And when I was a child, this was a particular parable. Now you heard the word I used, right? Parable. Story Jesus told to point out something to each and every one of us. And that's why Jesus told stories. Because we as people relate better to stories. We pay attention when somebody tells a story of their childhood. They tell a story with a point. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was telling a story here. And he told the story that so many of us want to hear. Now think about it. If you're brought up poor and you don't have much in life and you actually have hit rock bottom, I don't know if any of us here have ever hit rock bottom. But I know we came very close when I was raising my 3 kids. I remember one of the things that they'll still talk about today is every Friday we made this dish, this special dish. This special dish, the kids asked me what it was, and being that I was tired, having to work all day, and not quite having enough money to pay for everything everybody wanted. And it was a week before payday. Every Friday we had a dish we called garbage stew. Now garbage stew was basically whatever leftovers you had that week. If it was hamburger, that would be the base of it. If it was pork chops, that would be the base. Chicken, that would be the base. Whatever meat you had, and sometimes it'd be a little bit of all that go into that pot. Oh well, the canned vegetables that you had, peas and carrots and green beans. And if you're lucky enough, you had a potato or 2 left, so you peeled those and you threw them over it. Then you'd go into your spice cabinet and you'd get out this and shake it in and that, shake it in, and then you would then make a broth of some kind over all of this. And then you'd serve it to your kids. And my kids used to laugh about it. Because they'd have friends come over on Friday, which is the day I always told them, don't have friends come over. Because Lord, if they want to eat, you know what they're going to get, kids. And their friends would come over. And they'd eat that garbage stew like they never had a meal in their lives. Never could figure it out. Went to my son's wedding. And all these boys here from the football team and the swim team were there, and they'd come up and they'd talk to me and dance with me. I danced that whole night until my legs thought were going to fall off. But one of the things they all said to me, "We love to come to your house on Friday and have garbage stew." Because there was always plenty of them, and you would let us eat. And sometimes we saw you standing there without anything, so we all could eat. And we realized that. You gave us a gift. And they were right, because, you know, as a mama, you can eat cold eggs that your kid left on the plate. As a mama, you can eat whatever wood they left behind, and you would just wait until they all ate, and you'd eat it. And you'd go on. But to be hungry, or to be poor, is something I think most of us in this room at one time or one place in our life can relate to. Relate to that fact you're not sure how to pay the rent this week, or pay the light bill, or the gas bill. As a church, what are we? Very used to those things at this point in time in life. So Jesus is telling us a story. Timothy was talking to us about money being the root of all evil. How all this stuff enters us, and how we worry so much about it. And Jesus told the parable. And he told the parable of the rich man who had the fine clothing. Now, when I was a child, I'd have done anything for some fine clothing. It didn't come from a place called Atlantic Mills, which was an early Walmart or early dollar store, where you could go in and get a pair of pants for $2 and a shirt for $1. I'd have loved to have been able to go someplace else than Atlantic Mills. Someplace big and fancy where some of the other kids went to. You know, Sears, J.C. Penney's, and buy some of that stuff. I'd have loved to have a pair of tennis shoes that cost more than $2. Of course, the only thing you could get were kids then, because I'm old. They didn't have all these name brands. But I remember those times. And I remembered thinking about money and wanting more money. Think about different things in life. And wondering how come in Detroit, if you lived in Detroit, you either lived in Detroit or you dreamed about living in Grosse Pointe. Grosse Pointe happened to be where Henry Ford and the people who ran Chryslers and Chevrolet and all those places lived, big auto executives, the people with money. They lived in Grosse Pointe along the shoreline, you know, with those big mansions. And you dreamed that maybe I could live there instead of living in that little old house there on 8 Mile Road that God knows there was a small wall furnace that didn't heat the whole house. I had to get a piece of plywood and put it over a hole in the utility room floor so we didn't fall through it on the way to the bathroom. God, we would have loved to live there on Grosse Pointe instead of that little house that was falling down. And I think there's a lot of us that have come from those places in time. And we carry with us that thought because they tell us that money was the root of all evil. So you don't worry about that stuff, right? That's why we're told those stories. And Jesus told that story, and he told that story of what so many of us believe that will be repaid for our miseries. How many of us believe that? For all the miseries I've gone through in life, I'll be repaid. When I get to heaven, you know, it's the lullaby I used to sing to my kids. I got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where I never grow old. I want a gold one that's silver lined. We're taught that. And Jesus was giving us an example of that. An example in Old Testament terms, because that's all he had at the time, of Lazarus laying in the arms of Abraham. Something was said in class today that reminded me of that. I see my relatives coming to get me. Well, Abraham was seen as what? The father of all of us. Laying in the arms of Abraham. Being fed and being taken care of. And the rich man in Hades. Another nice word for hell. And he's there. And he looks up and he sees Lazarus and he asks that question. That question we all do, because he had the money and he was used to saying, bring me, give me, let me have. And it was done. You know, Father Abraham, hey, send that boy there, Lazarus, down with some water and let him touch my lips. And what Jesus was really telling us is that we're all equal. And there's that great chasm or that divide between us. And you can't order Lazarus around anymore. And no, he cannot come to you. You had the chance to go to Lazarus. You had the chance to help somebody out. And you didn't do it. So how can you now ask this man to come help you out? He says, well, okay, if you can't do that, can you take care of my brothers? Now, how many of us ask those questions? If you can't take care of me, can you take care of the ones I love? Can you go and tell them? And what does Jesus reply? Well, they've already heard. They heard from the prophets of old. They heard from Moses. They heard from the prophets. We would have been told something like, well, you heard that in Sunday school that you're supposed to take care of your neighbor. You heard that from Jesus, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. You heard it. Did you do it? Your brothers and sisters have heard it. Did they do it? You sealed your own fate, is what he was told. Now think about it. Think about all these warnings that were given throughout the Bible. Think about the promises we give ourselves. You know, the verse about a mansion, it's not about a mansion. If we read it up in the Bible and we read it, you know what it says? In my parents' house, there are many rooms, and I go to make a place for you. Now, I don't know about any of you, but to me sometimes that sounds like a mansion. Because from the day I was born, I shared a room with somebody. I don't know about all of you. We lived in a 2-bedroom house. There were 6 women in that house. Guess what that meant? 3 in each bedroom. And our bedrooms were not very big in that old house. And what I wouldn't have done for just a space mile. Now think about it. That's what God has promised you. In your parents' house, there are many rooms, and I go to prepare a place for you. Jesus was telling us in a lot of these parables. Look, you get a chance here, guys. You get a chance to have God's dominion here on earth. We get that chance every day of our life. We can make God's will here on earth. When we look at each other's hearts, we look at each other's souls, and we see a need in someone else. And I give that moment of time to that person. I give that person in need that dollar instead of going to the pounds. That's what Jesus was telling us. That's the great chasm, or space, between God's dominion and our dominion. That space is called love. If I am willing to do what I know is right, that doesn't mean that I take advantage of others or that others take advantage of me by telling me they need and they don't. But when I see a genuine need, think about the rich man. Every day he walked past. Every day he walked past Lazarus laying at the gate. Every day he saw somebody in need of food, clothing, and medical help. And he walked right on by. Is that what we do when we see a need? Do we walk right on by? Or do we shorten that gap and stop and help? Stop and help with whatever love is available in our lives. There are people that I have seen from this church that goes out of the way to help others. And there are people I see that have come through these doors with one thing in mind. Can I get what can I get? God has sent us to be the ones that say, how can I help? Not what can I get? Because I got news for you. When we give, we receive. Sometimes it's not so much that extra dollar in our pocket. It's the smiles that we see. It's the people going out of their way to help someone else. It's the people who go out of their way to help keep this church running, to help keep organizations running that do good. It's the people who take a little less in pay to work for an organization that does good for others. God is telling us that there's that chasm, or that great gap between God's will and our own love of comfort. And God says, let's shorten that gap. You know, I promise to take care of all your needs. Let's believe that and shorten that gap. Let's make heaven here on earth. And we have that power, each and every one of us. Sometimes the greatest joy in the world for me is just to sit in the backyard. Just to sit in the backyard and watch the birds, or say to Suzette, did you see my bluebirds? She says, where? Or to see the deer. Or to see the grandboys come over and tear the house up, looking for something to eat. All those things. We need you like I do that. To walk through these doors on a Sunday morning and see people busy preparing music, busy taking care of the flowers, busy helping, fighting over who gets to read. I'm waiting for that day. Those are the things when I know that we have closed that gap. And that gap is going to be so small that there's going to be a time when I just step over and I'm there. That's what Jesus was telling us with the story of Lazarus and the rich man. If you have, give. If you have not, don't be afraid to ask. God is there to love us, to care for us, and to care for our neighbors. But God uses these hands and these feet that are attached to you